We've only done this a few hundred times.
Yes, yes.
Not about books necessarily.
No,
But
well, with Bob Ben and Gordy, and now it's just me. And
you must miss those guys every day.
well, not every day, but
Yeah, quite a bit though.
quite
That's
often.
for sure.
Yeah,
The good old days.
yeah. So we are here in a place we've been several times before. It's just me, my tripod, and the camera and the microphone. And we've got a fella we just heard who's been on here once or twice before.
Once or twice.
Once or twice before. A guy who came up all the way from Florida just to talk to us today.
Well, and there is a daughter having a grandchild, but she comes in, or you come in a close second, let's put it that way. How's that?
Okay. And who the heck are you?
Yeah. Mark Barie, and wrote my first novel, and you have been kind and gracious enough to agree to a little show about my first novel, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, see, one of the problems when you're doing an interview like this is, what questions I need to ask. With Mark Barie, I've learned you don't have to ask a lot of questions, just sit back and
Yes.
listen. Yeah.
Some people call it diarrhea of the mouth. I shouldn't say that on air, probably, but I'm very proud of the book, so anxious to talk about it, as you might imagine.
Okay, as we usually do, we like to find out who in the heck Mark Barie is, because there's bound to be one or two people who, believe it or not, have never heard of Mark Barie.
Well, as you know, I'm, like you, a native of the North Country. Grew up in Champlain, lived in Rouse's Point since 1976, I guess. And somewhere over the course of all that time, started in a few successful businesses, sold them, did some economic development work, some immigration consulting work, and most recently a commercial real estate business, where I'm in their offices now, CDC Real Estate. And was kind of forced into retirement about 8 years ago March, when I decided to have a ruptured brain aneurysm and chased it down with 3 strokes. Gradually got into retirement, but now I'm fully retired, been living in Florida for 3 years, and I discovered something. Man cannot live by golf alone. And I grew tired of footnotes, as you know, and maybe some of your audience knows. My wife and I wrote 2 local history books. I wrote 2 biographies, one about Father Bushy, one about the president of Plattsburgh, former president of Plattsburgh, Smith Weed. And I grew very tired of footnotes. Thousands of footnotes later, I decided I did not want to do another footnote. And I discovered, much to my surprise, that when you write a novel, you can be true to history, but you don't have to document anything. And so that's how the first novel was born.
Historically accurate, but...
Yes, yes. One day my wife came, I should tell you the inspiration for the book. One day my wife came into the living room and announced that my great-great-grandfather, Isaac Wells, had fought in the Civil War. And I didn't know that. And I thought, this is exciting. And so I started checking into it. Christine gave me more and more information. I found out that Isaac was with the 118th Regiment, or better known as the Adirondack Regiment, that he was involved in the siege at Richmond and a few other battles. And so that was the inspiration. So this book is about Isaac Wells, and it follows the travels of the Adirondack Regiment. But as any good author does, I added a few interesting items, like I gave him a wife, I put him in prison, I had his leg blown off, and a few other fun things.
You're saying your ancestor had a wife?
Yes. Well, he had a wife anyway, and the real Isaac Wells lived to a ripe old age, and I shouldn't betray the end of the book, but this Isaac certainly had a few escapes with death. But it was fun writing it, and I got to do a few things. Even we got my hero in there. Abraham Lincoln's in the book several times.
Yes, I noted that. Now you grew up in Champlain. Was there 7 little Barries? I'm trying to remember.
The last time I checked, there were 8 boys and 1 girl.
Oh,
I have
9
7
Barries.
brothers and 1 sister, and my mom, bless her soul, is still alive and well. About 5 minutes from where I live in Sebring, Florida. She'll be 89 in August, and we were talking, before you turned the camera on, she knows more about her laptop and iPhone than I will ever know about computers. And so she's one very talented, very sharp woman. And she's still a mean cook, so I'm over there a lot, as you could probably tell.
So as soon as we get this on the internet later today, she'll be watching it down there.
She will be. She'll probably see it first and send it out to all of my kids and all my siblings and everybody else that I know. So she's my biggest fan.
So you mentioned Wells. That's going to be from your great whatever.
Great-great-grandfather.
Now Barie itself. Now I know. I talk about your wife, Christine Racine. That's French.
Right.
If you got a name like LaFountain, you know it's French. But
Mhm.
Barie, I never know what nationality that is.
Barry used to be Beryl.
Baril.
It was
That sounds
French. My ancestors, Christine traced them for me all the way back to France, but they originally landed in Three Rivers or Trois Rivières in Quebec.
There's a lot of that going around, isn't
And
there?
yes, there is. And so Beryl, actually, if you look at my father's baptismal certificate, it says Isidore Beryl, B-A-R-I-L. And on his first Holy Communion certificate, it says Isidore Barie, B-A-R-I-E. So I don't know if the nuns
Just
made a
the
mistake,
spelling?
perish the thought,
Uh-huh.
or they decided to turn that big L into a little E, and so he became Barie. And there's tons of them now.
Yeah, a lot of times you go back and you look at those old documents, and recently I found out an ancestor of mine, that Jean Lebrun, who was a great researcher out of Oldtown. He'd done our ancestry. My wife Judy had asked him to do the Anctils and the Fountains and the Castines and the Trudeaus, and it was a Solivier, S-O-L, like Oliver, but
Yeah.
yeah. So I'd thought that was my female ancestor, went way back to the original one that he'd
Right.
shown.
Right.
And recently there's a guy out of he's in Ontario now, but he came out of the same branch I did, the Castains out of Quebec. And so when I sent him my ancestry, he says, no, it's Olivier.
No kidding.
The S was part of another word,
Really?
and when Jean saw it, he put it on there. So it happens that it
Yeah.
can happen. You know, you're trying to read all those old scribblings, and
My wife is an expert genealogist. She's self-trained. She started when she was back in high school, back before it was the fad that it is now. And the one thing I've learned being at her side is she does a lot of this work, is so much, in order for it to be accurate, so much depends on the original documents. But the original documents themselves are often rife with errors, unexplained changes, like the type you talked about. And I've seen it in my own family. And Barry, actually, over the course of like 13 generations, all the way back to France, I think the spelling changed probably 6 or 7 times. But yet it was all the same family.
sure, yeah. Well, our friend Clyde Rabideau Sr.
Sure.
with the name Rabideau, he had over 70 across.
There was an expert genealogist too. He knew what he was
the
doing.
guy, you know, it was always fun to sit and talk with Clyde. You know,
Yeah. He was a gentleman too.
Yeah.
I liked him a lot. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Now Isaac Wells is on the other side of the family. That's on my mom's side of the family. She was a Wells. Her father was Leonard Wells, of which you probably heard.
Yeah, because you grew up right across from the
Yes,
Wells garage.
yeah, just almost across, exactly. And in the Wells, they did not have, Christine's going to kill me if I got this wrong, but I don't think there was any French-Canadian heritage there. I think there might have been some, but they were mostly on this side of the border. I'm not sure where they came from originally.
So you don't know if it was English or
No,
whatever.
I should, but I don't.
And well, of course, just because it has an English-sounding name like, you know, Dubois, in many cases became Wood or Woods.
Exactly.
You know,
You never know.
They just translated the word from French to English. So,
I was just pleased I had a relative that inspired me, you know.
Well, yeah, that you know, fought in the Civil War on our side.
Yes, yeah. Although I've since been told by some of my relatives married into the family that this one is a Southern belle and this one fought for the rebel cause, and I've been told that to make things at least equal, I should write a book from the, as someone told me down south, from the War of Northern Aggression. The War of Northern Aggression perspective. And I've been told quite often, you know, it says in the book, Civil War novel. It should say War of Northern Aggression. If you're down south of the Mason-Dixon line, you can really get chewed out. They're still fighting that war.
They're still fighting the war.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the next book, I was telling you earlier, I'm about 21,000 words into my second book, same theme, love and war, but it's based on the 6th great-grandfather of my son-in-law, Eric Ashline, who fought in the 7 Years' War and then eventually was recruited in the American Revolution. And hopefully I won't get into too much trouble for that.
The 7 Years' War, is that the French and
French and Indian War, yeah,
Okay.
that's the other name for it. You still remember your history, very good.
Well, yeah, because you kind of run out of wars, and of course, you know, we had a few of those battles. We had at least one of these battles up right here at Point of Fair with the Rogers Rangers and so on. You know, so that's, you know,
it's funny as I'm writing. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but as I'm writing a second book, I'm covering a lot of the territory that Christine and I covered back when we wrote Crossing the Line, the history of the border here in the Rouse's Point, Champlain area. And even now, it amazes me how much the Champlain Valley was involved in that war. we literally had a front row seat here in the
Why?
North Country,
Yeah,
watching the troops go back and forth.
This was the major thoroughfare.
Yeah.
Lake Champlain was the route.
So I'm looking forward to putting my hero in the second book somewhere in the vicinity of Benedict Arnold and the Battle of Plattsburgh and a few other things. So we'll see what happens.
And some people might find out that aren't from around here that Benedict Arnold was a good.
He was a hero for
Yeah,
a long
yeah.
time.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
which of
Absolutely.
course made his betrayal even more nefarious because
Yes.
he's been such a good
Yeah,
hero.
and people remember him as the traitor, but there was much that happened before he became a traitor.
Okay.
Hopefully, it'll be covered in the second book.
Well, let's go back to your first
Sure.
book. We sat right here, as I recall, or you're sitting right about where I was,
Right.
and our friend Father Boucher was here, and Gordy, and
That was a few years ago, Gal.
yeah,
We're getting
yeah.
old.
But so you had decided at that point you were going to write a book, and you wrote a book about Father Maurice Boucher at a St. Anne's Shrine.
I blame all of this on Father Boucher because he made it very easy for my first book. He sold several thousand copies. Would have sold probably several thousand more if he'd given me permission. But I think he sensed his, what turned out to be untimely death just a few months later. And I thought, well, this writing is easy because that book wrote itself.
Yeah.
He had a mailing list to beat all heck. I mean,
Oh,
it was
yeah.
just fantastic. And he was my greatest salesman, and he was fun to be with. I spent dozens and dozens of hours with him, interviewing him. So I said, well, this is a piece of cake. Well, I learned on the second, third, and fourth books, no, they don't work that way. It was much harder selling him. It was much harder documenting things, and it wasn't nearly as much fun. It was still a lot of fun. But I'm back to having quite a bit of fun because with a novel, as I said earlier, you get to take some liberties, which is really neat.
All right. So then your second book was that one?
Second book was Crossing the Line. I conspired with my wife, Christine Racine. The third book was a biography about Smith Weed called The President of Plattsburgh.
Whatever made you decide to write about Smith Weed?
Well, you should read the book. As some of your viewers may know, Calvin's having fun with me, but Calvin Castine is the reason I wrote about Smith Weed. True story, and I think I put it in the introduction of the book. I wanted to do a book on the 10 most influential women in the history of the North Country. Then I wanted to do a book. I couldn't find 10 most influential women of note.
You said that.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
said that.
In comes the email. This is years ago. So then I said the 10 most influential men, and I gave you my list, and I asked for your input. And you said, where's Smith Weed? And I think I said, without editing it, who the hell is Smith Weed? And you made me do my homework like a good teacher, and you said, well, go look him up. Go look him up. And I don't think I was 2 days into that research, and I said, that's my next book. And so The President of Plattsburgh was born, and to this day, it is still the only biography of Smith Weed.
Which is ironic, because he was
Very
so
ironic.
influential.
Yep, and it's still being sold. It's available in local bookstores. I just talked to both of the local bookstores. I had to send them some more. And so it's not a New York Times bestseller, obviously, but more and more people are starting to appreciate the full impact of this one man. Not my book, but the man.
Yeah.
And I hope that one of these days we'll see one of those fancy blue road markers, maybe down by the bridge that was named after him, or where he used to live at where Stafford's law offices are now. But something to commemorate the significant accomplishments and the amazing life of this single man. To this day, I don't believe that any man, including anybody you and I know, had as much influence over the future of the North Country as did Smith Weed.
Yeah, well, maybe Ron Stafford might.
Well, he would come in a close
Yeah,
second, but
yeah.
I'm honestly convinced Smith Weed was more influential because he was active at a time when the North Country could have gone this way or that way.
Mm-hmm.
And he was there with the hospital and a few other things.
Roads and
And if and when Smith Weed is given the reputation and credit that he deserves, you can take some credit for it. How's that?
Well, I just think if you'd written that book 100 years earlier, you would have sold a gazillion copies because
Possibly,
because so many people knew him back then.
Yeah,
but
people who were still living knew back then.
of course, they also knew where Pike's Cantonment was back then.
Yes,
so.
exactly. A lot of things have changed.
Time marches on.
But
then
it was fun.
Your fourth book was a collaboration.
The fourth
again.
book was a collaboration with Christine Racine. You have a very good memory. It's called The Boat People of Champlain. It was about an amazing industry of boat building that occurred in the tiny village of Champlain. And now, years and years, over 100 years later, not a single piece of evidence remains to indicate that that industry was once there. But in the book, which is also very popular, we're still selling copies of it, the names of the boats, but more importantly, the names of the boat people who built the boats, who ran the boats, and just spawned this amazing industry until the New York State canal system kept enlarging their canals, and it was no longer physically possible to make a properly sized canal boat and run it down the Chazy River into the lake. Or I guess that'd be up the river.
Yeah.
And,
plus the dredging and everything else.
a fun book to write. Still get a lot of calls on it too.
Yeah, and I found out from that book that Anthony Lively, who was a captain on one of those canal boats, is mentioned in your book, and I'd almost wondered who that Anthony Lively was on my deed, because
Oh, really? And
Yeah.
it was the same one?
oh yeah,
No kidding.
Yeah, he was captain, and he was the original, probably the one who built the
Yeah.
house where I live in right now.
We
so.
still get letters and phone calls from people saying that, could I have a copy of the book because I was told that maybe that my ancestor's name is in the book, and they're so delighted to find out that that person was a boat person,
Mhm.
either a builder of the boat or somebody who lived on a boat or somebody who ran the boat, piloted the boat. That was a real joy. Christina had a lot of fun with that one, and down in Florida, we thought, well, maybe we could write another local history book. But the Florida history is only a couple hundred years old. Here it goes back to the beginning of the border.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have as, I'm going to get a lot of emails from Florida people now, I suppose, but their history is not nearly as fun as ours, not nearly as interesting.
Yeah, we were here at the birth of this country.
Absolutely.
So that's,
the welcome mat, so to speak.
Yeah.
So
then you decided it's time to do a little fiction.
This was a tremendous work for me, a tremendous amount of work, I should say. But it was also fun, too, because I got to combine a lot of things that interested me. Number one, of course, my great-great-grandfather, Isaac Wells, to tell the story of the Adirondack Regiment, which is in there. I based a lot of the facts on a 3-year history of the Adirondack Regiment from one of its members. But I also got to talk about the Civil War, which I'm a bit of an aficionado on, but especially my hero, Abraham Lincoln. He's in the book several times. And every time you read about a battle or some conflagration that the Adirondack Regiment was involved in, or about Abraham Lincoln, or about John Wilkes Booth, who's also in the book, that is true. You could look that up, you can Google it, and you can say, oh my God, he did not make that up. And as a result, there are some very interesting stories in the book, some little-known facts. For example, most people, of course, know that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, but very few people know that he survived an earlier attempt at assassination. He was actually shot at without result. Without boring you, and without telling too much about the book, he had a habit of going from the White House to a place called the Soldiers' Home, which was just a short horse ride away from the White House. And he also had a habit of escaping his security detail. Not because they were sophisticated and had a secret service back then, but because Washington was surrounded by rebel soldiers and he needed some protection. But he didn't like it. So one night, about 9 months before he was actually killed, Abraham Lincoln was riding his horse all by himself, stovetop hat, gray shawl, on his way to the nursing home.
Very inconspicuous at that stovetop.
Yeah, yes. Well, somebody recognized him and they took a shot at him. His hat flew off. The horse took off at a racing gallop. The president of the United States almost fell off his horse. Somehow he made it to the Soldiers' Home. He shared his story with his security detail and quite a few of his friends. And anyway, they sent out about a half a dozen soldiers to go investigate. And they went to the road where they thought it happened, and they found absolutely nothing except the president's hat with a bullet hole in it. True story.
Wow.
It's in the book.
It parted his hair from the side, probably.
Oh, my God. To think about it, of course, history was changed when he was eventually killed, but most people didn't know that. And I found that out researching for the book. I wanted my hero to run into Lincoln once in a while, and not coincidentally, my hero was at the Soldiers' Home at the time this happened. So
it just happened to...
And falsely accused of shooting the president, man. That's as much as I'll say. You'll have to get the book and read the rest of it. But the book is full of stuff like that, unknown things.
Yes, well, knowing what a Lincoln fan you were, maybe in the local area, Jim Keeble might rival you, but...
he always had a much better collection than I do. I don't know if you know this or not, but I've since donated my collection to the Allen County Library in Indiana, Fort Wayne, Indiana, of all places. Most people don't know, but the Allen County Public Library in Fort Wayne, Indiana has the largest collection of Lincolnia, second only to the Springfield Museum. And as a birthday present, my second oldest son, Oliver, knew that I wanted to do something with the collection. I just couldn't sell it, bring it to an auction. And it was worth quite a bit of money. And so when we went to Fort Wayne, my wife and my son, second oldest son, conspired, and they said, we got a little surprise for you today. And they brought me to this library, and I said, a library? Really? Like I don't spend enough time in a library. And I went into the library, and I was introduced to the curator, who brought me down into the vaults of this library, which are like a large warehouse, two of them. No fire suppression system, like you would say, chemicals instead. Amazing. The largest collection of Lincoln autographs, the largest collection of books, everything you can think of. And I went nuts. And then they announced to me that that would be the new home for my collection. I still get emotional about it. And so if you ever go to the Allen County Public Library and get introduced to the vaults, which very rarely people can get, you will see a little plaque on the wall that says, Mark Barie's collection. And that's where all my Lincolnia is. I don't know what Jim Keeble's going to do with his, but I highly recommend that he talk to a fellow down there by the name of Victor, who runs the Allen County Public Library, and he'll find you a good home.
So whether you wanted to sell it or not, they're going to give it away on you.
Well, I got a good tax deduction that
Okay.
year. I'm grateful for that, but I got a bigger joy out of knowing that it was being well collected, well taken care of, and that people would enjoy it there. I was just surprised that the Allen County Public Library wanted my collection, but apparently some of the stuff was unique, including a volume I had from a fellow whose name you would remember, Truesdale, a photographer from Champlain. And he had a bunch of Lincoln photographs in their plates. And I had the office working copy in my possession. And they went gaga over that. They had never seen that before. And so now they have it, and they've taken good care of it, I assume. One of these days they'll get back to Fort Wayne. My son has since moved to Indianapolis. He's a second-year law student, but he's not lobbying in the Indiana State Legislature. So he's gone to the dark side. But the Lincoln collection is still in Fort Wayne.
So we walk in there, we just say, I know Mark Barie, and they'll
Well,
whatever they're doing.
I think you need some sort of a background check to get into the vaults. But I'm sure if you tell them you know Calvin Castan, they'll probably let you in. Something along those lines.
Certainly will.
So.
Now, I got to tell you, I don't like this kind of book because once I get into it, I can't put the darn thing down. And, I want to do, so I like books with just a lot of little stories in it.
Mm-hmm.
So I can read 15 pages today, and
Yeah.
if I got time to read 2 chapters, I'll do 30.
Exactly.
But with this in here, I got into it, and I said, I got to keep going, I got to keep going, I got to keep going.
So I apologize for your lack of productivity that day.
know,
It is a short read, though.
Well, it depends how fast you read, I guess. But you introduce us to the characters, you develop the characters. Sometimes there were things that happened, and I go 4 or 5 chapters, and it's never referred to again, but you tie it in at the end that,
Mm-hmm.
I say, well, has Mark forgotten that he's he said this
That's
back there?
you just put your finger on one of the hardest parts of writing a book. You have characters, and at some point, just because of the train of events, you have to let them go for 3 or 4, even 5 chapters. But eventually you got to get them back in, because you find out very quickly that the reader, whether you wanted them to or not, they get attached to your characters. Either they despise them or they love them or something in between. And if you just let that character fall off the face of the earth, your readers get very upset with you. And but that's very difficult to do, especially if you write the way I do. I just write, it just flows out of the pen. And I don't sit there and plot everything out ahead of time. And sometimes I surprise myself, oh my God, he killed her, or she killed him, or whatever it happens to be. I didn't know what was going to happen. It just happened. And so then you've got to make sense out of it. And that's called the editing process, which is a torturous, tedious, time-consuming process that I wouldn't wish on anybody, not even my worst enemy. Editing a book is difficult. That book is relatively error-free, Joe. Just the other day, somebody you know and I know, Paul Grasso, told my sweet daughter and asked her not to tell me that he found the mistake.
Uh-oh.
And and I'll tell you about the Great Escape in a second, but in the story about the Great Escape during the Civil War, there was a reference to a rubber sheet. And about 10 pages later, I referred to it as a plastic sheet.
Oh, plastic.
Plastic wasn't invented in the
Plastic.
1860s.
Oh my gosh.
So my friend Paul Grasso pointed out to my daughter, but strictly admonished her not to talk to me about it for fear of hurting my feelings. But I'm actually very grateful to Paul for pointing it out. And if and when there's going to be a second edition, we'll clean that error up very quickly. But at least it was a rubber sheet in the beginning, just got transformed into a plastic sheet because Dum Dum here wasn't paying attention, you know.
So we have to mention the name every once in a while so people know what they're looking for.
Yep.
There it is, right in front of them here. War Calls, Love Cries, a Civil War novel by Mark Barie, right there. So.
And if you wanted the official blurb, it's about a young man, a very innocent young man from Keysville, New York, right in your hometown. If you're a fan of Keysville, by the way, you'll find dozens of references through the book, who had dreams of marrying his hometown sweetheart and going to law school. And they got interrupted rather nastily by a treacherous brother and by the American Civil War. And he goes off to war, and the question is, will his love for his hometown sweetheart survive? And that's what the story's about.
I'm trying to remember now. When did Anderson Falls become Keysville? Do you remember? I can't.
Oh God, no! I remember if you go to the museum, it's still
yes,
named
Anderson Falls Museum. Yeah,
exactly. And I haven't even been there yet. I don't know. But Keysville was featured. I don't know why, because Isaac Wells was actually spent most of his time south of Keysville, but I put him in Keysville because I just wanted to. I think probably because I had more information about Keysville. I think Keysville is a very historic place in our county. Gets too little attention, and I've actually contacted the library in Keysville, and I think there's a historic society in Essex County, and I'm hopefully they'll entertain my presence sometime in May when I'm back up, if not earlier, and I'll do a presentation there. As a result of writing the book, I've developed a presentation called the 7 Astonishing Facts About the Civil War That Will Shock You. I'm on the speaking circuit down in Florida already, just talked to some groups down there. Hope to do the same thing up here. And if and when I do give those talks, Keysville will be prominently featured.
Well, yeah, you've got the Keysville, you have the Anderson Falls, and in Elizabethtown you do have the Adirondack Museum there. Not to become confused with the Blue Mountain Museum, but and I know Adirondack has and Elizabethtown has guest speakers, so certainly work your way into there.
Well, it's a logistical nightmare when you're living in Florida and you want to come up here. You were very kind to me and agreed to this interview, but I do have an event scheduled at the Champlain Meeting House with, I never know if it's Janet McFetridge or Jamie Sumac now, because the name changed somewhere along the way. But she's
Janet McFetridge.
Janet McFetridge. She's a sweetheart, and she's agreed to host an author's night, and Christy and I will be there, and this will be the featured book later on in January, about which you will hear more later, I'm sure. So.
Okay, so coming up in January, as we're watching this, because people will watch this in April, and they'll watch this 5 years from now on the internet.
And they'll wonder.
Yeah. But they can still find this book, even if they're watching 5-10 years from now.
You can find it right now. You can find it at the Cornerstone Bookshop in Plattsburgh, or Lake City Books in Plattsburgh. You can find it on BarnesandNoble.com, or you can find it on Amazon.com. And if you just go to MarkBarie.com, you'll get a signed copy and free shipping costs. Make it very easy to buy the book.
There you go.
When you write your first novel, I found out that your objective is not so much to sell books as it is to establish your reputation as a real live author. And I don't feel I'm quite there yet, so I'm still working on it.
Well, you're real and you're live. So the author is the part you're working on.
Yeah, exactly.
So you got to know how to spell Mark with a K. Some people spell it with a C. They don't know how to spell Mark, so
especially
spell it with a C.
heritage, right?
And then Barie is Barie.
Exactly.
So if you're looking up Mark Barie, you're gonna know. And Beringer is that you?
Behringer, no, it's a publishing company out of Naples, Florida, and they agreed to publish my book. And I have to tell you, they're what's called a hybrid publisher. Give your audience a little education about the publishing industry. If you write a book and you wait for Random House or Hardcourt Press to call you, you will die eventually of old age. They will not call you. On the other hand, you can walk into the doors of any vanity press, and for a fee, usually not insubstantial, they will print your book. But in between the vanity presses and the Random Houses are what we call hybrid publishers, something that was born probably less than 10 years ago. And these folks are a little bit more discerning. They will not print anybody who walks into the place with a book. On the other hand, they will charge you a fee for editing the book, for doing the electronic, technological black magic that's required to get it on Amazon.com. And so I paid them for that. But I've always been a believer that a man's got to know his limitations. Apologies to Clint Eastwood. I don't know how to edit a book, and not as well as I could. And I certainly don't know anything about the electronics and the technological know-how required to get this thing on a Kindle version, which is available on Kindle version too, by the way. And so I gave the first 50 pages of my book to Jeff Schlesinger, who owns and operates Behringer, and he called me up and said, well, we love it. And he said, guess what? He said, my editor is a Civil War aficionado.
Uh-huh.
And I said, a marriage made in heaven. So one thing led to another, and unless I really goof up, or he does, he's already talking to me about the third book. I'm 21,000 words in the second book, and he wants that third book to be about the War of 1812, which ironically, he says, never gets enough publicity. He said, too few people know about it. And at one point he said, do you know the Champlain Valley played it? I said, oh my God, yeah. And
No, really?
so yeah, the third book's going to be about the War of 1812. And in that book, it won't be just Keys, it'll be Champlain and Plattsburgh probably featured.
I would hope so.
Yes.
Let's not forget what
Absolutely.
Dewey Cemetery here.
But you know, Plattsburgh has so many interesting stories. But if you do your research, bore your readers one more time, your viewers one more time. There's everybody knows of the movie called The Great Escape with Steve McQueen, but
and Mark Chapman. And Mark Chapman.
Yeah, exactly. But the first Great Escape occurred during the Civil War. There was a prison called the Libby Prison. It was just outside of Richmond, actually technically in Richmond. It was 3 houses, tobacco warehouses right on the James River. And it was a prison for officers only. And horrendous conditions, not as bad maybe as Andersonville or something like that, but certainly a bad prison. And so in this prison, true story, the Colonel Tom Rose was in there, and his Major Hamilton was assistant. They decided they no longer wished to partake of Confederate hospitality and wanted to escape. And so their strategy was to dig a tunnel to a large sewer line. And so they did. And they used clamshells and little penknives, an old wooden spittoon, and they worked 5 men in 3 different shifts, 24/7. Took them weeks just to get through the fireplace in the kitchen on the bottom of the prison where the prisoners are allowed to kind of roam freely. And took them weeks more to get to the sewer line, only to have the entire tunnel flood. In fact, Colonel Rose almost lost his life. There was a second attempt, sewer line was too small. A third attempt, the tunnel collapsed. Finally, they decided to go to a shed just outside the perimeter of the prison. And something like 200 some odd inmates got out. Well, more than half of them were forced to return, were caught and captured. But my hero was one of the ones that successfully got out. But that's a story that people don't know and rarely heard about it, but it was the biggest single prison break in the history of the Civil War, probably ever in any American, any kind of conflagration like that. And it was fascinating stuff to read about, and it was fun to put my hero right in the middle of it.
Right in the middle there.
Even though he was enlisted, man. I had to smuggle him in.
Yeah,
he wasn't an officer.
Under false pretenses.
Yeah, right.
Hogan's heroes would have been proud of him.
Yeah, exactly.
And of course,
it was a lot of fun.
You know, the most northern battle in the Civil War, it wasn't really a battle, but a skirmish, took place right across the lake from us here.
Exactly.
So is that one of your 7 that you talk about?
No, it's not. That's not in the book. But
I know it's not in the book, but you say so everything you talk about, and you talk about your.
No,
7
I should bring that up. I don't know that my Florida audience would appreciate that, but I think the North Country audiences would. I should probably substitute that because most people don't know that. A lot of people don't even know that the completion of Fort Montgomery was hurried by an executive order by President Lincoln, who was concerned about a Confederate invasion from the north, as you know. And so that's why this fort out here in Fort Montgomery was finished and garrisoned in the end with quite a few armaments and soldiers because of the Civil War. Another good idea. I should add that as a 7th fact.
Yeah, there was of course, the raid of St. Albans is what we're talking about, and it was just, a bunch of the Civil War, Confederates came across. I think a couple of them had escaped. You're talking about escapes.
They got away.
They escaped, and they went north into Canada, and they came back. And
yeah, we touched on that in one of our history books. I think Crossing the Line, we might have touched on that. Christine and I might have touched on that little escapade. and because we were talking about Fort Montgomery too. But you know, down in Florida, you've got to kind of localize it. And so the other day I was speaking to a group of Rotarians, and one of my 7 facts had to do with the fact that if you take World War I, World War II, Vietnam, and Korea, you still don't have enough people killed in that war to equal the number of people killed in the Civil War. Now, in the audience, probably 1/3 of them are veterans, you know, mostly aged people in Florida. And so they were interested with that, but they were very much on the edge of their seats when I told them that 2/3 of those 600,000 plus soldiers that died in the war did not die from their wounds. They died from disease like typhoid and smallpox and dysentery. 1/3 died from their wounds. That they didn't know. That was an astonishing fact for them. And there's a few more astonishing facts in that presentation. But I think I just picked up an 8th one thanks to you, so I'll use that one too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you know, that's the thing when you do research like that. A few years back, I did a little book on the history of Champlain, and so I was always looking for books about that, about the history. And one was I came across was you get a book that's about this thick, and you end up with maybe one paragraph that you find that pertained to our area that you could use. But there was a guy I can't remember his name, a Drolette, I think, out of it was stationed in Lacole, and he was rambunctious, and he wanted to come across here and get something going during that Civil War,
right?
Because he knew about the fort up here, which is right behind us as we're talking.
Right.
So he came across on a horse and buggy with one of his people, and he heard some cannon going off and so on, and he pulls up, and it happens to be they're commemorating the Lincoln's death. So the day of his funeral, they were having a ceremony in a local church here. So he ended up in that parade with his horse and buggy. So he ends up following the military back to the Fort Montgomery, and they toast him for. Oh, I think it was at the church. They saw him there.
I'm familiar with that story. He gets rather inebriated.
Yeah. So, but at the church, they point him out and thank him for being there.
Yeah, he was. If I remember the story correctly, he was intent on capturing Fort Montgomery, or at least doing something vicious. And he ended up walking by accident to the church. They toasted him. He toasted them. And by quite a few drinks later, he no longer had the desire to conquer the Union, and so he went back to Canada, presumably with an oversized hangover. You know, you have, I've said this publicly, your manuscript is on film. It's on, I guess, magnetic tape now. Have you ever thought about writing a book yourself? I shouldn't be asking the interviewer.
Well, no, not
questions,
no. Like I said, I did that book in the Champlain 2000. We put out a book for to help fund.
But
Bob
you could
Van
do
Park.
like 20 astounding facts about the North Country.
Oh, yeah, but
or more.
It's there on. Just sit and watch the videos.
Well, yours is a medium that will last forever. I'm afraid books are.
I don't know.
There's still 300,000 books published every year, so they're not definitely going the way of the dinosaur, not yet anyway. But fewer and fewer kids are reading books nowadays. That's kind of sad.
It is very sad, that attention span. They used to talk about it way back 50 plus years ago when I was in school. They give you heck if you read a comic book because your attention span would be just. But attention span now is getting far worse than it was when I was reading comics.
I might have told you a story once. Christy and I were at St. Mary's once with the 2 little granddaughters. It was quite a few years ago. I think the youngest one was probably 3 or 4. And as was my custom with my own children, I would give them the large Miss Salette. And I don't know if they still have it at St. Mary's, but there were 5 or 6 pictures of birds in that Miss Salette. And I would tell little Jocelyn, look for the birds, look for the birds. So she'd be flipping. Of course, the object was to keep her busy while her father was giving the sermon. So she finally found a bird soaring with the sun in the background, so on and so forth. And she starts doing this on the page with her finger, scrolling on the bird. And she looks at me and she says, Pepe, it's broken. Because they grew up with those screens scrolling in that animation. They just assumed it was in a book. And it's not there. And you wonder, that was my granddaughter, who was a very bright little girl. That was my granddaughter just a few years ago. You wonder what's happening now with young kids. I don't know if it's good or bad or somewhere in between.
I think for the most part bad, but
well, they do seem to have a shorter attention span.
Yeah.
My son and my daughter-in-law, I think, are doing a good job controlling the screen time. I know Alex and my son-in-law Eric have promised that when little Noah was born, sometime the end of February, early March, that they're going to be very careful and conservative about screen time because they know the advantages and disadvantages. And interestingly enough, my son-in-law Eric Asher was just telling me that Steve Jobs, all these technological giants, they controlled the screen time of their children.
Well, sure.
Strictly.
Well, of course.
So maybe they know something they're not telling
Yeah,
everybody.
yeah. Yeah, not in my house type of thing, yeah.
Exactly. Of course, screen time watching hometown television
that's
is
well
so it's
spent.
okay.
Well spent.
It's educational. Thank you for having me today, Kevin. I really appreciate it.
Oh, we're not done yet.
Oh, good. Well, I can tell you some more.
Yeah. So you have the main characters here. You have your ancestor,
Isaac Wells.
Yeah.
I gave him a wife.
I gave him
Her
a
name
wife.
is Rebecca.
Rebecca,
I gave him a brother.
a brother.
He did have a brother, but he had a brother named John Wells,
All right.
who in real life died in a mining accident.
Oh, okay.
But here he doesn't quite die.
No.
He dies rather violently.
So there is some
But there is a real
literary
John.
literary license in there.
Yes, a literary license.
Poetic license,
yes.
I think that's called.
And I gave Isaac a school teacher who encouraged him to go to law school. I gave him a best friend who did go to law school and was supposed to go to law school with Isaac.
And Isaac may or may not go to law school here. We're not telling
Exactly,
you.
we're not telling you. I gave him a neighbor just down the road in Keysville who did go off to war, and we won't tell you what happens to him either. But there's quite a little cast of characters, including his future mother-in-law and a very friendly little old lady just down the road from them who needs eggs because all of the chickens were kidnapped, and all sorts of color like that. And almost without realizing, I kind of built up a family of characters, and at the same time, I think a good flavor for what it was like to live in the North Country back in the 1850s and 1860s. And it was the same when they were out on the road, out in the war scenes and stuff like that. It was amazing to me how much is out there about war and the death and the dirtiness of war, and so that's in the book also.
Yeah, and I wondered with the Civil War, knowing what how much of a hero Lincoln was, if it would just be an homage to Abraham Lincoln. But you point out that even back then, even as popular as Lincoln was, there were still some people who.
I can tell you really read the book. Yes, in the book they talk about. I talk about the attitude toward Mr. Lincoln by the prisoners of war. In Libby Prison, true story, they actually had a newsletter that they would put out, a handwritten newsletter, and it would come out probably once a month, and it was passed around one sheet all around to the inmates. And for some reason, their Confederate captors never objected to it, probably because the newsletter was almost always filled with ad hominem attacks on Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was not a popular president. He was even less popular among Union soldiers who felt that they weren't getting their pay on time, they weren't being fed properly, and it was even less popular amongst Union soldiers who had the misfortune of being taken captive by the Confederates, because they were literally felt that they were left there to rot in prison, as did the folks from Libby who decided to do something on their own. But if you were an inmate in a Confederate prison, you took your wrath out on Abraham Lincoln.
Instead of on the Confederates who were holding you.
Exactly.
And,
exactly. Well, they depended on those Confederates for what little they did receive. Although Libby was famous for being able to, the inmates could look out their windows, which were no glass on them, just wooden dowels in them. And if you were seen looking out the window, you were shot on sight.
Really?
In Libby Prison, true story, you were shot on sight. And several people died that way. It's in the book, part of it's in the book. And they would, once in a while, they would sneak a peek out the window, and they could see all of the supplies that were sent to them by the Union, foodstuffs, all sorts of things, all of it being taken by the locals and by the Confederates. So you could be a little bit discerning and say, well, at least Washington was trying, but the Confederates took most of what Washington produced for their inmates. And the result was that the inmates got little or nothing at all.
Yeah, the old saying, an army runs on its stomach.
Exactly. That supply chain is very important.
Yeah, and how you get food back and forth to.
But it kind of made me twinge a little bit when I wrote that part of the book, because I'm not used to reading anything bad about Abraham Lincoln. I don't look for things that are bad about Abraham Lincoln. And I distrust most of what I read about Lincoln that's critical. But this is true. The prisoners of war during the Civil War did not like Lincoln. He was not a very popular man at the time. Sad but true.
Well, I'm sure because of their circumstances, they had to blame somebody, so.
Well, I think they did anything, said anything to survive, including digging long tunnels to nowhere, including writing relatively nondescript newsletters and making criticisms. But that's probably one of the more interesting character arcs in the book. It's a publishing term that people use to describe what happens to the character from the beginning to the end, where Isaac starts out as just adoring Abraham Lincoln, but ends up not so much.
Mhm.
Now, I won't get into the
No, no,
details.
no,
I
no,
want
no.
people to read the book.
Yeah, it's 271 pages.
Yeah, I think closer to 280, something like that.
Closer to
270
280,
some
we'll
odd,
see,
yeah.
we'll see.
I didn't know what the word count would be. I think it was,
271
yeah.
right here.
originally it was about 70,000 words, and by the time I got done editing, I lost a couple thousand words. So it's probably
Lost a couple.
closer to 68.
On
And
purpose? On purpose?
No, I had to get rid of a few chapters. It's funny, after you finish the book and you go back, especially if you wait a week or a month like I did, and you go back and, oh, that's ridiculous, that's wasted. So and they tell you when you edit viciously, just,
Mhm.
no empathy whatsoever. And so it came out smaller than I thought it would. But I found out also that there are no rules for your first novel. There are no rules for any novel. Some people do a novelette with less than 40,000 words. Other people write these tomes with 500,000 or 600,000 words in them, which is ridiculous. And the first rule I discovered in the wonderful world of publishing is that there are no rules. If you can get away with it, do it.
So how many words?
That's about 68,000 words, actually.
68,000.
And right now, by the time I get from the 7 Years' War to the Revolutionary War in book number 2, probably closer to 90,000 words. So we'll see what happens in the editing process.
Well,
A lot of words.
What I can see as a problem. Now, so you said you wrote it kind of chronologically. You didn't have the ending.
No, I didn't. And I read a lot about writing now. I read what I'm a member of Facebook pages of other authors and authors' sites and so on and so forth. And they have software now where you can plot the entire book out and so on and so forth. And they have reams and reams of literature on what to do when you get writer's block and so on. And I'm sitting here feeling like the circus freak because I never had writer's block and I never organized my book that way. Maybe I should, I don't know. But my guide was chronology. When the Adirondack Regiment left Plattsburgh, they eventually ended up in Albany, down near the Washington area. And so I just followed them. And when it came time to write the next chapter, I said, well, what's the next event? Was it a battle? Was there a lull? Did I have an opportunity to insert some of my own fiction?
But you knew how it was going to end when you started it, I hope.
No.
No, you didn't.
No, I didn't.
So have you read it?
I had it.
See if it ended the way you thought it would?
Well, it's funny. I didn't know he was going to. I don't want to reveal but there were some things that happened. I didn't know what was going to happen. With his wife and with her even. She has, by the way, I'll give you a little tip. She has a deep, dark secret.
Yes.
And very deep and very dark.
Yes.
And it's in the book. And it haunts this couple for years and years. I didn't know that was going to happen. It just came out of my pen one day.
That part wasn't true history. That's
me.
The fiction
that's
part.
me. That's the fiction
part.
part. But what happens to him at the prison? That I just read about the Libby Prison. I said, well, he's going to be in the neighborhood, so I'll put him in the prison.
Sure.
But I wish I could say that I was such a fantastic writer that I knew all this ahead of time. But a lot of times I had to consult my pen to find out what was happening. And I don't care if one person reads the book. I really don't. And if I can break even, that would be a minor miracle because I've laid out a little money for editing costs, and I also had a website put up. And I just had so much fun. And I literally get up out of bed every morning like my hair's on fire, and I can't wait to write or research or market. I'm having a blast. This, I'm told, are the golden years of retirement. And it's a lot more exciting and, frankly, a lot more fun than playing golf.
Well, yeah, I would have to agree with that. I've never been a golfer.
Well, unless you're playing with your siblings or your children,
well, then you
or good friends like Matt Boyer, who's probably listening to me.
Yeah.
Golf is not that
He's
much
got
fun.
this place bugged, I know.
Yeah, right. Well, even back when I used to play with Matt would put some money on it. I said, we don't have to bet. And he said, yeah, we do, because you get bored if you don't. He was smart. He knew me very well.
Hope he gave you odds.
Yeah. Well, he's probably a much better golfer than I am now. So well, no, I can't say I planned it all out. It just kind of happened.
So you wrote the whole thing, and then you had to edit?
Yes.
So how do you make sure you don't edit out something that you read it and say, oops? I needed
Well,
that information for the ending.
what I learned the hard way, and I'm doing it with my second book, I am summarizing each chapter in a separate bunch of sheets of paper. And so that helps me. So when characters are introduced, I know they're introduced in chapter 4. When a character dies, I know they died in chapter 16 or whatever it is. So I'm keeping loose track of what I'm doing now. And so I suppose that's more organized than my first book. Because yes, it was very difficult. You'd be reading the book and editing and say, wait a minute, did I give her red hair and blue eyes, or was it brown hair and green eyes?
Rubber or plastic.
Rubber or plastic, right, whatever it is. And so you have to be a little bit organized in that fact. That's why you also employ what's called beta readers, okay? If you can get your publisher, like I did, to give you a handful of books, you get them out as quickly as you can to your trusted advisors, your friends who read accurately and remember well. And they'll call you up and say, you know, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or, you know, people like Paul Grasso, I should have made him my beta reader, said, you know, plastic wasn't invented until the, what, 1950s or whatever it was. And here you got it in the 1860s. That was simply a mistake. But just the typos and the punctuation, I still have a problem with commas. I have in my mind, a plethora of commas. You can see too many commas in the book. But hopefully we'll clean all that up in the second book. But for my first effort, I'm not ashamed of it. And the reviews, I think I got 5 or 6 reviews on Amazon.com so far. That's a tedious and time-consuming process, getting your reviews done. But they're all good. The worst review I got was from my sister, who gave me 4 stars out of 5.
Oh, no.
So the next time I go to her house for dinner, I will still give her 5 stars because I want to get invited back for dinner. But everybody else gave me 5 stars, so I'm pleased. But I recommend it highly. It's great fun when you're retired. One of these days you're going to have to retire, you know. You can write a book.
Well, I don't want to write a book, and I don't want to retire. So
there you go. Okay, solves your problem.
I've written comic books, but I haven't.
Yeah, there you go.
I haven't written a novel yet. History, as a historian yourself, is very important to you, that you're accurate in all this, and you create a cast of characters. And but again, I would be so afraid when I started editing that I would edit out something that it's there because you wrote it down, but all of a sudden you pulled it out, but you still got reference to that at the end, and you forgot. So I would be so afraid. That's why those readers are so important.
The beta readers are important. You end up reading your own book so many times that you get sick of it. You get tired. In fact, one of my friends said the book ended too quickly. And I said, yeah, I did. Part of that was on purpose, and part of it was because I was sick of it. And so, and also I write, I guess, like I speak. I think a good speech is where you leave the audience wanting just a little bit more. And I think this book does that. I've had a number of people come and say, I didn't want it to end. I wanted it to keep going. Is there going to be a sequel? Well, there will be a sequel called, about love and war, but not about this. At least that's not what I'm planning yet.
Well, it's going to be a prequel.
Yeah, a prequel. It could be a prequel. That's a good idea. Thank you. But yes, it is complicated. It's a writer's nightmare that you do something like that. So you rely on repetition. You keep reading. Give it to your wife. Have her read it. Give it to your best friends. If you've got some beta readers, that's even better. As a result of putting out this first book, I think I'm going to have quite a few volunteers willing to read the second book. So hopefully I'll be able to eliminate those errors if they've occurred.
Yeah, well, that's the thing too, is if you can't give it to your beta readers until it's completed, because again, if they read it and then you edit something out, it's still in their brain that it's there.
Yeah.
And they read it again, it's probably still in their brain that it's there, but at reading the first time, well, there's a big gap there. So. Well,
and two, you got to deal with your publisher, who's trying to meet a deadline that you perhaps agreed to, and my edit that absolutely has to be done. He looks at it and said, well, that's just cosmetic, So you can agree quickly on the grammatical things and the punctuation things, or things that are clearly wrong, where literally I've done this. In fact, my wife spotted one of the last errors she spotted in the book was I had the hired hand who was in a death struggle with a nasty guy in the kitchen. I changed his name from, I can't think of his name now, but anyway, I changed it. I gave him another name. And my wife said, this doesn't make any sense. And this book was literally 2 days from being printed. I was so grateful to her. But those are the kinds of mistakes you can make. Well, and you really have to work hard to catch them. They say you never get all of the errors. But this book, how many edits do you think were done in this book? Can you guess?
Uh,
From its first rough draft to its
I
completion?
would have not a guess.
Over 1,000.
It doesn't surprise me. That.
Over 1,000. And there's only, what did you say, 270 pages. That means, you're probably in the neighborhood of 4 edits per page. You think, my God, Mark Barie's an awful writer. I didn't think I was that bad. And my publisher tells me that he's seen some books where they get to 10,000 edits. And I says, is it worth it? It's not really.
Well, but it's so easy when you're just writing an email to somebody to,
Oh,
what you want to
absolutely.
say, but you
Absolutely.
write the wrong word. You put is instead of if, and
Yeah. And I write kind of strangely. I actually write with legal pad, with my hand. And I love doing that. I've always done it. Then after I get that, I dictate it to my iPad. I can talk to my iPad. And I clean it up a little bit then. And then I email it to my desktop. And on my desktop, I'll give it what I call its final for now polish and fix it up. And then I put it away. And I learned the hard way from the first book, and I'm doing a studious in the second book. I just put it away. Sometimes you put that chapter and you say, it's not that good. That's crappy. Other times, I love that chapter. But you don't know how good it is or how bad it is until you come back and revisit it.
Read it again, yeah.
In the fall, I'll probably be editing book number 2. And that's when I'll say, why did I put that in there for? Oh, this is great. I should expand on this, whatever it is. And you go through the editing process. Then your publisher gets involved. And it's time-consuming and it's tedious. But if you've got things to fill in your time, like marketing or the next book, it's not that hard. It's fun. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. As I mentioned, there's 271 pages, and once I got about 60, 70 pages into it, I just wanted to keep on reading. But there's 36 chapters, so if you only want to read a few chapters at a time, you can. So
Yes,
it's not like
you can.
you've got
I'll
these
tell you a
long
secret.
chapters that.
Do you know how many chapters I had originally? 100.
100 chapters.
I had chapters that were as little as 1 page. And my publisher commented, said, Mark, we can't do that. And I said, well, how do I change the location or the point of view that's talking in the book? Like, point of view is very important to me. I found out, and as I'm writing a book, that one day I read it from her point of view, and the next day I read it from his point of view. The pain, the suffering, what they see, what they don't see, what they're feeling. Well, you have to somehow alert the reader that you're changing the point of view. Otherwise, you got a bunch of talking heads, and the reader's very confused. Who's thinking? Is it Isaac or is it Rebecca? And so he said, we do that. I call it a curly cue, but he had something else for it. He called it a stop, I think. And I'll say, if you look in the book very carefully, you'll find them every now and then. These little things right here. I don't know if you can see it on your camera.
Probably not, but yeah.
So it's like a little fancy decoration, art deck. And so when you see one of those,
It's a change of scenery.
it's a change of scenery, most likely, definitely a change in point of view. And what I was doing is putting a new chapter there. So I literally had over 100 chapters. He said, no, we're going to clean this up. So when his editor decided to get rid of a lot of the chapters, oh my God, I couldn't believe it. He was desecrating my Bible, my work of art. But he did a lot of good things. A couple of things I didn't like what his editor did. He did some transition sentences, and I didn't like them, so I changed them or eliminated them. And so we got the number of chapters down. But in the book number 2 that I'm working on now, the average chapter is 1,000 words. So that's a little bit more reasonable. So that's still probably not long enough in some cases.
Well, if you're going to write, how many, 60?
Well, if it ends up at 70,000, it could be 70 chapters.
Yeah, you're going to have to have some more.
So we'll have to put more of those little curly cues in there. This is not a publishing term.
Okay, I got to ask you.
Sure.
Be honest. I assume you read it more than once since
God, yes.
Now that it's published and it's out there outside of the paper, the rubber and the plastic, is there things you said, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that?
Absolutely. I think that's self-inflicted torture for most authors. The one thing that is most important to me as I look at the book now, I wish I'd added one more chapter to it. Without giving away the ending of the book, I thought of a couple things I could have done at the end of the book that would probably make you cry or smile so broadly. Now, my wife read it, and she was crying when she finished. And she's my barometer. I trust her greatly. But she's even said, oh, boy, she said, if you'd written one more chapter and did this, this, and this, and I won't say those things, I don't want to give away the book. And I thought, that would have wrapped this thing up in a ribbon. But other than that, there's some phraseology, some words. I'm learning as I go along. I could see I could have done better. One of the things you want to avoid in writing is adverbs. I think there's still a few in there. The other thing is that everybody keeps telling you, don't say it. No, what's the word? You don't want your readers to show it, show, don't tell. That's what the phrase is. Don't tell, show. So if you're telling the reader that Calvin Castaigne is angry, you say his face grew red, he bit his lips, and he's biting his fingernails or something, or stomping on the floor. Instead of saying Calvin was angry. Show, don't tell.
Right.
And I've seen some areas in the book where I should have done a better job showing.
Well, I think
and less
you were very
telling.
good about
So
being descriptive to how they were, and so I think you were good at painting the picture of
yeah,
what was
yeah.
happening there.
You know what this sounds really sick, but I have to tell you, you're a friend of mine. One of the funnest parts of writing the book was the battle scenes. I loved writing about the blood and the gore. Isn't that awful? Probably because it was easy. It's very easy to describe somebody who just got his head blown off, versus telling the reader that she's distraught, but she's trying to hide it from her lover or would-be lover, or whatever it is. It's a much more difficult challenge for the writer than that first scene. So maybe that's why I enjoyed the blood and the gore, but I did.
Now there are some love scenes in here, but they're all PG-13, I would call it.
You know,
Nothing R-rated in here.
It's funny because my friend Matt Barie opened the book to the one page with the one scene of a man and a woman in bed. And he was teasing my daughter earlier that, oh, I wanted this book is filled with those really, raucous scenes. And she said, no, my dad wouldn't like that. So he opens the book. I forgot what page number it is, and it's a PG love scene. But they have and continue to laugh about it. I do too. And no, but it's a junior high student could beat that very easily. In fact, I wouldn't even mind if my 10-year-old granddaughter read it. She said she's going to one of these days, but she's busy putting her Lego sets together from Christmas, so I don't think it's going to happen soon.
If you've watched the movie It Happened One Night with Clark Gable, it happened that you couldn't survive this.
Right.
You won't be
Well,
shocked.
by today's standards, there's nothing in there that
No.
beyond PG. I mean, I don't even think is there a 4-letter word in the book?
I hope not.
I don't think there is. No.
Not even a darn in there, no.
There's a gall darn, I think, which is back in the West. Well, back then in the 1860s, cursing was pretty serious.
Well, sure.
And you very rarely invoked the Lord's name. And something that was unbelievable or amazing was what in tarnation. That's the way they talked back then. And that was difficult trying to replicate that kind of viewing. Because without realizing you can put today's vernacular 150 years ago and it doesn't fit.
And then some Paul Grasso will come along and say,
yes, exactly. Well, he doesn't know yet, but he's going to be my number one beta reader. So.
All right, War Calls, Love Cries. What's the next one going to be called?
Well, right now the working title is called She Spied for Love. And just to give you a rough synopsis, not finished yet, but it's about my son-in-law's 6th great-grandfather. And he comes over from France to fight in the 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian War. And he falls in love with a nun.
With a nun? Oh, my gosh.
With a nun. Well, she's not quite a nun yet. She's a novitiate.
This is from his days at St. Mary's there, when he loved his third-grade teacher.
She's a novitiate that never takes her final vows.
He gave the ending away.
Yeah. And no, that's not the ending. It's the beginning. That's the beginning. And what she does afterwards involves.
So Matt Boyer will like this one.
Yeah. Well, so far the heroine and the hero have not gotten together, much less consummated their relationship.
Father Boucher might not like it.
Yeah. Well, Father Boucher was very easy to write for. He only had made one change in his biography, which I won't discuss because he wanted to change for that very reason. He didn't want to publicize. But no book that I ever write will be as easy or as inspiring as his life story.
Okay, well, in this case, truth was better than fiction because he did so much that you couldn't have fictionalized it and made it any
I
better.
have a mug with his picture on it, and I have a prayer card right in my office back at the villa. I think of that man almost every day.
Well, anything else, Mark?
No, not at all. And thank you again. War Calls, Love Cries. I think if you're like Calvin, you're like most of my friends, you'll enjoy the read. It'll go by fast. But if you have opinions, go to markbarie.com and express them, please. And if you want a signed copy with free shipping, go to markbarie.com.
Yeah, and tell them again, I'm going to go ready to hit the buttons. So you just tell them again where they can find it besides...
you can also get the book at Cornerstone Bookshop in Plattsburgh, Lake City Books in Plattsburgh up on Beekman Street, or Boynton Avenue, I should say. And you can go to Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com. Or if you're feeling lazy and you want a signed copy, go to MarkBarie.com, MarkBarie.com, and I will ship you myself a engraved copy, personalized if you wish, free shipping, and the cost of the book is $15. So it makes a great present.